"You need to leave, sir." These 6 words, spoken by a 24-year-old waitress, were not a request. They were a judgment. The man she spoke to was Arthur Vance, a millionaire CEO on the verge of signing a $200 million deal that would cement his empire. He was sitting in New York's most exclusive restaurant, the Gilded Quill. But in a matter of seconds, that deal, his reputation, and his entire future would not just fall apart, it would be systematically torn down. This isn't a story about bad service. It's a story of calculated revenge, a hidden past, and a single moment when karmic justice finally collected its bill. Arthur Vance was not a man accustomed to failure. He was the architect of an empire, the CEO and founder of Ethelred Innovations, a tech behemoth that devoured competitors with the cold, unfeeling efficiency of a glacier. His name was whispered with a mixture of awe and fear on Wall Street. His mornings typically began at 4:30 a.m. in his Manhattan penthouse overlooking Central Park, with a symphony of data from global markets, a team of assistants anticipating his every need, and a suit pressed to razor sharpness. This morning was different. This morning, the universe had decided to test Arthur Vance. It began when his biometric alarm, synced to his pulse, failed to go off. He woke up at 7:02 a.m., a time he considered suitable for bakers and the unemployed. His personal driver, a man named Henderson who had been with him for a decade, had called in sick, a severe case of the flu, a minor inconvenience. "Insignificant," Arthur muttered, knotting a silk tie. "I'll drive the Jaguar." The Jaguar E-Type, a 1968 classic, was his one true indulgence. It was also, as he was reminded this morning, a finicky beast. He sped down the FDR drive, the engine growling its approval, only for a sudden downpour to unleash itself upon the city. The sky turned a bruised, angry purple, and then, on the 53rd Street exit, the Jaguar sputtered, coughed a plume of black smoke, and died. Arthur Vance, the man who moved markets, sat in a dead car as rain hammered the roof. He jammed the ignition. Nothing. He hit the dashboard. Not today. Not this day. Today was the Novatech day. The $200 million acquisition of Novatech Solutions was the final piece of his puzzle. It would give him a total monopoly on the next generation of capacitor technology. The meeting was set for 9:00 a.m. at the Gilded Quill, the only restaurant in New York discreet enough for a deal of this magnitude. His counterpart, Marcus Thorne, was an old-school titan who believed a man's handshake was his bond and his appearance was his resume. Arthur got out of the car, his $4,000 Italian suit instantly darkening with rain. He tried to hail a cab. Taxis, sensing his desperation, sped past, spraying gutter water onto his trousers. Finally, a grime-caked yellow cab pulled over. He dove in, smelling the faint aroma of stale cigarettes and pine-scented air freshener. "The Gilded Quill, 64th and Madison, and hurry!" he barked. He arrived at 8:45 a.m. The rain had plastered his graying hair to his scalp. His suit was a wrinkled, damp mess, his shoes squelched. He looked less like a captain of industry and more like a man who had lost a fight with a washing machine. He strode into the hushed, opulent lobby of the Gilded Quill. The air was thick with the scent of old money, beeswax, and fresh lilies. A stoic maître d', whose name tag read Pierre Dubois, raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "Good morning, sir. May I help you?" Pierre's voice was a silken blade. "Reservation, Vance, for 3. It's the private dining room, the alcove." Pierre's eyes did a slow, insulting scan, from the mud on the shoes to the disheveled hair. "The alcove is reserved for—" "Mr. Vance, yes. But are you Mr. Vance?" Arthur's temper, already simmering, began to boil. "I am Arthur Vance. My car broke down. It is pouring rain. I am meeting Marcus Thorne here in 15 minutes for the most important meeting of my quarter. Now, please, show me to my table." Reluctantly, Pierre nodded. "Of course, Mr. Vance. This way." He led Arthur through the main dining room, where quiet conversations paused. Diners, senators, bankers, old money matriarchs stared at the damp spectacle. Arthur ignored them, his jaw set like concrete. Pierre seated him in the alcove, a semi-private room separated by heavy velvet curtains. "Your guests have not yet arrived. May I take your coat?" Arthur was already unbuttoning his sodden jacket. "Just bring me a coffee, black, and 2 towels." As Pierre left, a young waitress was nearby, resetting a table. She was slender, with serious, intelligent eyes and brown hair pulled back in a severe bun, conforming to the restaurant's strict standards. Her name tag read, Clara. Pierre paused by her. "Clara, you will be handling the alcove. Mr. Vance is having a difficult morning. Be quick. His guest, Mr. Thorne, is a valued patron." "Yes, Mr. Dubois." Clara watched as Pierre retreated. She picked up a silver coffee pot. Her hands were steady. She walked toward the curtained-off room. She had seen the reservation sheet. Vance? The name meant nothing to her. She saw the man at the table, rubbing his face, his damp suit jacket slung over the back of the chair. He looked pathetic. "Your coffee, sir," she said, her voice neutral. He didn't look up. "Just pour it, and find out where the reports are. I had a courier send a package here this morning." "Yes, sir." She poured the dark liquid. As she did, the man shifted, pulling his wallet from his damp trousers to place it on the table. A platinum Vance card was visible. Clara paused. Her hand, for the first time, twitched. She looked again, not just at the disheveled man, but at his face. The strong jawline, the cold, steel-blue eyes that were now scanning his phone with frantic energy, the distinctive mole on his left temple. The silver pot in her hand grew heavy. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. It wasn't just Vance. It was him. Arthur Vance. Clara Sullivan felt the blood drain from her face, replaced by an icy calm. She hadn't seen that face in 10 years. Not since she was 14, sitting in the back of a sterile courtroom, watching that very same man calmly and legally dismantle her entire world. The man who had destroyed her father. And he didn't recognize her. To him, she was just part of the furniture. "Is there a problem?" Arthur snapped, noticing her pause. Clara blinked, her composure returning like a steel door slamming shut. "No, sir. Enjoy your coffee. I will check on your package." She walked away, her steps measured, her mind racing. The biggest deal of his life. Today. Here. With her as his waitress. The universe hadn't decided to test Arthur Vance. It had decided to deliver him. Clara Sullivan was not her real name. Not fully. She was born Clara Sullivan Hayes, but she had dropped the Hayes when she started working. It was safer. Sullivan was common. Hayes was cursed. Her father, Thomas Sullivan Hayes, was not a titan like Vance. He was an innovator, a brilliant, gentle-hearted engineer who started Sullivan Components in his garage in the 90s. He wasn't a businessman. He was an inventor. His company didn't devour, it created. Their specialty was a niche, high-capacity microcapacitor. A design so efficient, it was, by all accounts, 10 years ahead of its time. For years, Sullivan Components thrived as a boutique supplier to high-end medical and aerospace clients. Thomas Sullivan Hayes was proud. He provided 150 local jobs. He was paying for Clara's future violin lessons and her Columbia University fund. Then Arthur Vance took notice. Ethelred Innovations was a predator. Vance saw the patent for the Sullivan capacitor and knew it was the key to unlocking the next decade of consumer electronics. He didn't want to partner. He wanted to own. He made an offer. Thomas Sullivan Hayes, proud of his creation and loyal to his employees, refused. "My company is not for sale, Mr. Vance," he had said, his voice shaking slightly on the conference call Clara had accidentally overheard. "My people, my work, it's not just an asset on a balance sheet." Vance's reply, cold and devoid of emotion, had been etched into Clara's memory. "Mr. Hayes, everything is an asset. Your people are liabilities, and your work is now my property. You just don't know it yet." The assault was brutal and surgical. Vance didn't try a hostile takeover. That was too messy. Instead, he systematically strangled Sullivan Components. He poached their top 3 engineers, offering them salaries Thomas couldn't possibly match. He then initiated a series of frivolous patent infringement lawsuits, baseless claims that nonetheless forced Thomas to drain his company's capital on legal fees. The final killing blow was a corporate espionage play. Vance's team found a disgruntled junior executive at Sullivan Components, a man named Michael Reed, who was deep in gambling debt. For a sum that paid off his debts and set him up for life, Reed sabotaged a major shipment to Sullivan Components' biggest client, the aerospace firm. He swapped the high-grade components for cheap, defective ones. The subsequent failure of those components in a critical test launch was catastrophic. The client sued for breach of contract. The news hit the trades. Sullivan Components' stock, which had just gone public a year prior, plummeted to nothing. In the fallout, with the company hemorrhaging money and clients fleeing, Vance stepped in with a life-saving offer. Buy the company, including its patents, for pennies on the dollar, just enough to cover its outstanding debts. Thomas Sullivan Hayes, cornered and betrayed, had to sign. He lost everything: the company, the patents, the house. Clara remembered the day, the auctioneers on their lawn, the look on her father's face. Not anger, just a vast, hollow emptiness. Arthur Vance had not just bankrupted him, he had stolen his identity. 6 months later, Thomas Sullivan Hayes had a massive stroke. He died in a county hospital, his health insurance gone with his job. Clara was 15. Her mother, a strong woman, shattered. She took on night shifts as a nurse, but the debt was too much. Clara's Columbia Fund was a bitter memory. Her violin was sold. When she turned 18, she started working, taking her mother's maiden name, Sullivan. She worked in diners, in bars, and finally, after mastering the art of invisibility and perfect service, she earned a spot at the Gilded Quill. It was the best-paying service job in the city. The tips alone were enough to pay for her mother's small apartment and her own tiny studio, with just enough left over to slowly, painfully, chip away at the mountain of medical debt her father had left behind. She hated the obsequious bowing. She hated the entitlement of the men who ordered $5,000 bottles of wine without looking at the price. But she needed the job. It was her lifeline. Until today. In the gleaming stainless steel kitchen, she leaned against a cold wall, the coffee pot still in her hand. Her pulse was a drum against her ribs. "He's here. The man who killed my father. He's here, and he's stressed about 200 million. He's stressed about money he'll make from the very technology he stole from us." Another waitress, a kind older woman named Maria, noticed her expression. "Clara, you look like you've seen a ghost." Clara looked up, her eyes hard. "I think I just did." "Is it the guy in the alcove?" Maria whispered. "Pierre said he's a nightmare. Looks like he crawled out of a sewer." "He's Arthur Vance," Clara said, the name tasting like ash. Maria's eyes widened. The Arthur Vance? Ethelred? Wow. We'll just keep his coffee full. Men like that. They can end you with a single phone call. Be careful. Clara nodded. Be careful. Right. She picked up the file that the courier had delivered. It was thick, bound in dark blue leather, with the Ethelred Innovations logo embossed in silver. She also grabbed 2 hot, damp towels from the warmer. She pushed through the swinging door, her spine straight. She was no longer just a waitress. She was Clara Sullivan Hayes, daughter of Thomas. She didn't have a plan. She just had 10 years of compressed rage, and a man who had forgotten he'd left victims in his wake. She re-entered the alcove. Arthur was pacing, his damp shirt sticking to his back. "Your towel, sir, and your package," Clara said, placing both on the table. He grunted, snatching the package. "Finally, where is Thorne? He's late." "Mr. Thorne is known for his punctuality, sir. I'm sure he'll be here precisely at 9. Arthur stopped pacing and looked at her. Really looked at her. "You're new. I don't recognize you. I've been here 6 months, sir." 6 months, he mused, tapping the leather-bound report. "And in 6 months, have you learned that your only job is to be invisible unless I ask for something?" Clara felt the sting. It was the same casual, dismissive cruelty he had shown her father. "My job is to provide excellent service, Mr. Vance. Then provide it, silently. My head is splitting." He waved her away. "Go, get more coffee, and tell Pierre to turn the music down. It's distracting." Clara's hand tightened into a fist at her side. "Yes, Mr. Vance." She turned to leave, just as the velvet curtains were drawn back. Pierre Dubois stood there, his face a mask of polite reverence. "Mr. Vance," Pierre announced. "Mr. Marcus Thorne and his associates." Showtime. Marcus Thorne, CEO of Novatech Solutions, was the antithesis of Arthur Vance's chaotic morning. He was a man who seemed to defy humidity, his silver hair perfectly coiffed, his bespoke suit a testament to Savile Row. He was flanked by 2 associates, a sharp-eyed legal counsel named Evelyn Reed and a young analyst, David Chen, who both carried identical leather briefcases. Thorne's eyes, the color of chipped ice, took in the scene in a single, comprehensive glance. He saw the world's most exclusive private dining room. He saw the damp, wrinkled, and visibly agitated man he was about to merge with. He saw Arthur Vance's water-stained jacket thrown over a priceless Louis XIV chair. And he saw the waitress, Clara, standing just inside the curtains, holding an empty coffee pot. "Arthur," Thorne said, his voice a low, resonant baritone. He did not extend a hand. Arthur, caught off guard, plastered on a corporate smile and ran a hand through his damp hair. "Marcus, good. You're here. Apologies for well, it's been a morning. The E-type, you know." "I do not," Thorne replied, taking his seat. His associates sat on either side of him, opening their briefcases in silent, practiced synchronicity. "I prefer transport that arrives. Punctuality, Arthur. It's the calling card of a man who respects other people's time. We are here to finalize a $200 million deal. I trust your morning has not unfocused you." The rebuke was sharp, and it landed. Arthur's fake smile tightened. "I am never unfocused, Marcus. You know that. The Ethelred Novatech merger is my top priority." "Excellent," Thorne gestured to Clara. "Miss, water for the table. Still, and an espresso for me. Double." "Yes, Mr. Thorne," Clara said, her gaze lingering for a second too long on Arthur. Thorne noticed. He was a man who noticed everything. He prided himself on reading rooms, on understanding the micro-expressions that betrayed a man's true intentions, and he saw something in the waitress's stare. It wasn't deference. It was contempt. Arthur, meanwhile, was trying to regain control. He opened his own leather-bound report. As you'll see from the final projections, the synergy is— Before we begin, Thorne interrupted, holding up a hand. Let's be clear. I am still hesitant. Novatech is my life's work. Ethelred is a giant, and I am wary of being swallowed, Arthur. You say merger. The press says acquisition. I am here for you to convince me that my company's legacy will be protected. Marcus, the legacy is why I'm here. Arthur leaned forward, his voice dropping into its practiced, persuasive salesman's cadence. Your capacitor designs, they're brilliant, but they're stalled. You lack the infrastructure, the capital, the supply chain. I provide that. Together, we will own the market. This isn't an acquisition, it's an ascension. Clara returned, silently placing glasses of water. As she set one down next to Arthur, he, without looking, flapped a hand at her. More coffee, I'm empty. Clara flinched, not at the gesture, but at the sheer, unadulterated arrogance. He was so engrossed in his performance of power that he couldn't even muster a please. He was a king demanding tribute from a peasant. She refilled his cup. Her hand was shaking now, not with fear, but with a volcanic, righteous anger. 10 years of it. 10 years of scraping by, of watching her mother age prematurely, of visiting a grave that should not exist, all because of this man who was now complaining that his coffee was tepid. This is lukewarm, Arthur snapped, pushing the cup an inch away. Get me a fresh pot. Hot. Now. Arthur, Thorne said, his voice laced with impatience. The stuff is irrelevant. Focus on the matter at hand. My legal counsel has a question about the intellectual property clauses. Section 4, sub-paragraph B. Arthur waved a hand at his own report, frustrated. It's standard boilerplate, Marcus. All IP transfers to the new parent entity, Ethelred Innovations. That, said Evelyn Reed, Thorne's lawyer, speaking for the first time, is not what we agreed upon. We agreed on a shared IP trust. Novatech's patents remain under Mr. Thorne's partial control. A semantic difference, Arthur scoffed. It is a $200 million difference, Arthur, Thorne said, his voice deadly quiet. I will not be innovated out of my own technology. A tense silence fell over the table. The deal was teetering. Arthur knew it. He was losing. His appearance was a disaster. His car was a wreck. And now Thorne was picking at the one clause he needed to secure his monopoly. He needed to reset the room. He needed to re-establish his dominance. He looked around, and his eyes landed on the one person in the room he held absolute power over. Clara. She was standing by the service station, waiting for the fresh pot of coffee to brew, her back to them. You! Arthur barked. The entire restaurant seemed to pause. Waitress, what is your name? Clara turned slowly. Clara, sir. Clara, sir. I have asked you for hot coffee 3 times. I have asked you to be silent. You are failing at both. My guest and I are in the middle of a discussion vital to the global technology sector, and your incompetence is a distraction. Get the coffee and then get out. Do you understand me? It was a power play, a public dressing down to show Thorne that he was, despite his appearance, in charge. Marcus Thorne looked on, his expression unreadable, but a faint, distasteful frown touched his lips. He despised this kind of behavior. It was crude. Clara looked at Arthur Vance. She saw the stress in his eyes, the desperation. He was using her as a punching bag to impress his rival. He was trying to prove he was an alpha by kicking the dog. And in that second, her decision was made. The job didn't matter. The rent didn't matter. The mountain of debt didn't matter. Only the ghost of Thomas Sullivan Hayes mattered. She picked up a silver tray, but instead of walking to the coffee machine, she walked directly to the alcove. She stepped past the velvet curtain and stood at the head of the table, placing the empty tray down with a soft, definitive clink. Arthur looked up, enraged. "I told you to— You need to leave, sir." The words hung in the air, cold, clear, and perfectly enunciated. Arthur Vance stared. He actually blinked, as if he couldn't process the sounds. "What? What did you just say to me?" Marcus Thorne and his team froze, their faces a mask of stunned disbelief. Clara Sullivan met Arthur Vance's steel-blue eyes with her own, which were now burning with a cold, 10-year-old fire. "I said," she repeated, her voice louder now, projecting to the tables just outside their alcove, "You need to leave, sir." The silence that followed Clara's statement was not just an absence of sound. It was a physical weight. It pressed down on the occupants of the alcove, sucking the air from the room. The quiet clinking of distant silverware from the main dining room seemed impossibly loud. Arthur Vance was the first to move. A slow, dangerous smile spread across his face, a mask of controlled fury. He genuinely believed this was a joke, or perhaps a bizarre, audacious shakedown. "You need to— leave?" he repeated, leaning back in his chair. He glanced at Marcus Thorne as if to share the absurdity. "Well, this is certainly novel service." He turned his full attention back to Clara. His voice dropped to a low, threatening growl. "Listen to me, little girl. I don't know what you think you're doing, but you are making the biggest mistake of your short, insignificant life. I could buy this restaurant. I could buy this entire city block. I could have you fired so fast your head would spin, and I would make sure you never serve another cup of coffee in this town again. Now, apologize to my guest and get out of my sight." Clara didn't flinch. She didn't move. The fear that should have been there was absent, burned away by a purpose that had been waiting a decade to ignite. "You could," Clara said, her voice steady. "You're very good at destroying things, businesses, lives. You could probably do all of that. But you won't." "Oh, really?" Arthur sneered, his confidence returning. "And why is that?" "Because," Clara said, taking a step closer, "the Gilded Quill has a code of conduct. We reserve the right to refuse service to anyone." "Refuse service?" Arthur laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "On what grounds? My suit? My car? Don't be ridiculous." "No," Clara said. "On grounds of character. We don't serve men like you here." Marcus Thorne, who had been watching this exchange as if it were a tennis match, finally spoke. "Miss," he said, his tone cautious, "this is highly irregular. This is a private business meeting." "I am aware of that, Mr. Thorne," Clara said, addressing him respectfully but without breaking her focus on Vance. "My apologies for the interruption, but this is not a business matter. It's a personal one." Arthur's smile vanished. "Personal? I've never seen you before in my life." This was the moment, the pivot point. Clara felt the eyes of Pierre, the maitre d', burning into her back from the edge of the dining room. She saw the shocked faces of Thorne's legal team. "You haven't seen me," Clara said, her voice dropping. "But you knew my father. You destroyed him." Arthur's face went blank. The manufactured rage was replaced by a flicker of genuine confusion. "What are you talking about? Who is your father?" "Thomas Sullivan Hayes," Clara said. The name hit the table with the force of a grenade. Evelyn Reed, Thorne's lawyer, gasped. Her head snapped toward her boss. David Chen, the analyst, began typing furiously into a tablet. Arthur Vance's blood ran cold. The color drained from his face. "Sullivan. Hayes," he whispered. "Yes." Clara's voice was now shaking. but with power, not fear. You remember. Sullivan components, the capacitors, the patents you stole, the lawsuits you fabricated, the man you drove into bankruptcy and then into a hospital bed he never left. "This is outrageous," Arthur stammered, standing up so fast his chair screeched on the marble floor. "This is slander. Security." "You bankrupted him." Clara's voice rose, and now the entire restaurant was listening. "You sent Michael Reed to sabotage his shipments. You lied, you cheated, you destroyed a good man, a brilliant man, all so you could swallow his company and bury his technology." "Security!" Arthur bellowed, his face turning a blotchy red. "Get this hysterical woman out of here." Pierre Dubois was already rushing forward, his face ashen. "Miss Sullivan, what is the meaning of this? You are fired! Fired! Leave the premises at once!" "I am leaving," Clara said, her eyes locked on Vance. "But he has to leave too." "That's enough," a deep voice commanded. It was Marcus Thorne. He too had stood up. He wasn't looking at Clara. He was looking at Arthur Vance, and his expression was one of dawning, horrifying realization. "Ms. Sullivan," Thorne said, his voice clipped and precise. "Is what you're saying true?" "It is," Arthur interrupted. "Absolutely not! It was a standard, hostile acquisition. It was business. This is a pathetic, emotionally unstable employee with a family grudge." "Is it, Arthur?" Thorne said. He turned to his lawyer. "Evelyn, the name. Sullivan Components. Why do I know that name?" Evelyn Reed looked up from her notes, her face grim. "Because, Marcus, they were the company we tried to partner with 8 years ago. They were working on a microcapacitor, a design we could never replicate. We heard rumors it was revolutionary. Then they suddenly went dark, folded. We all assumed they'd just failed." "No," Clara said, stepping forward. "He didn't fail. He was murdered, corporately, by him." She pointed a finger directly at Arthur Vance. Thorne's cold, calculating gaze settled on Vance. The pieces were clicking into place. The puzzle was assembling itself. The reason Ethelred was so desperate to acquire Novatech. The reason the IP clause was so non-negotiable. The reason Vance was willing to pay $200 million for a company that, on paper, was only worth half that. You didn't just buy Sullivan Components," Thorne said, his voice a whisper of dawning comprehension. You buried the tech. You bought them to stop them from producing. And you're buying me for the same reason. You're not trying to ascend. You're trying to prevent me from becoming your competitor, from stumbling onto what he nodded at Clara, what her father already discovered. Arthur Vance opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He was, for the first time in his professional life, completely and utterly exposed. The man who prided himself on seeing 10 moves ahead had been checkmated by a waitress. The disheveled suit, the stressful morning, it all paled in comparison to this. This was not a setback. This was annihilation. Clara Sullivan, her mission complete, looked at the shell of the man who had haunted her childhood. He looked small, pathetic. "So," she said, her voice clear and carrying across the now silent restaurant. "As I said, you need to leave, sir." The seconds stretched. Arthur Vance, a man whose voice could command boardrooms and sway markets, was rendered utterly mute. He was a shark pulled from the water, gasping on the deck. His damp, wrinkled suit now seemed less an anomaly and more a pathetic metaphor for the man himself. Marcus Thorne, however, was a man of decisive action. He had built his empire on logic, analysis, and an utter intolerance for duplicity. He looked at Arthur, then at Clara, then back at Arthur. The entire narrative of the last 6 months, The friendly overtures from Ethelred, the generous offer, the mounting pressure to sell had just been reframed. It wasn't a merger. It was a silencing. Thorne snapped his briefcase shut. The sound was like a gavel striking. Evelyn. David. "We're leaving," he announced. Arthur's head snapped up. "Marcus? Marcus, wait. We can discuss this. This is a misunderstanding, a corporate, a family dispute. It has nothing to do with us." "It has everything to do with us," Thorne corrected, his voice like granite. "You didn't come to me as a partner, Arthur. You came to me as a predator. You didn't want to build something with Novatech. You wanted to prevent Novatech from discovering what Sullivan components had already created." He gestured to Clara, who stood, trembling slightly, but unbroken. "This young woman, her father's work, that was your real target. You weren't acquiring a $200 million company. You were covering up a decade-old crime." "That's not true," Arthur pleaded, his voice rising in desperation. He was losing the deal. He was losing everything. "It was a legal acquisition. The patents are mine. I own them." "And what you did with them, Arthur?" Thorne asked, buttoning his suit jacket. "You buried them. You sat on a revolutionary piece of technology to protect your existing, inferior product line. You choked innovation. You are not a builder, Arthur. You are a gatekeeper. A dragon sitting on a hoard you didn't even earn." Thorne turned to his team. "The Ethelred merger is off the table. Permanently." "Marcus!" Arthur cried out, a raw, desperate sound. $200 million. You're throwing it away because of some waitress's sob story?" Thorne paused, his back to Arthur. He turned slowly, his gaze so cold it could have frozen fire. "First, it is clear to me that her sob story is the truth. My legal team knows the name Sullivan Components. We know the timeline. This," he gestured at the disaster, "fills in the why. Second, you lied to me. You misrepresented the entire foundation of this deal. And third," he took a step toward Arthur, who instinctively recoiled, "I am not throwing away $200 million. I am saving the soul of my company. I would rather go bankrupt as an honest innovator than become a billionaire as your partner in fraud." He looked past Arthur, to Clara. He gave her a single sharp nod. It wasn't approval. It was acknowledgement, a recognition of one player by another. Then, Marcus Thorne did something that sealed the moment in legend. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a monogrammed money clip, and withdrew a crisp $100 bill. He placed it on the table. "For the water and the espresso," he said to Pierre, who was standing by, paralyzed. "My apologies for the scene, Mr. Dubois. The Gilded Quill remains an excellent establishment. It is your clientele that seems to be diminishing in quality." With that, Marcus Thorne and his team swept out of the alcove, past the stunned diners, and out into the rain-swept streets of Manhattan. The $200 million deal was dead. It hadn't just fallen apart. It had been executed, publicly, in the space of 3 minutes. Arthur Vance sank back into his chair. The adrenaline was gone, leaving a heavy, toxic sludge in his veins. The room was spinning. His phone, which he'd left on the table, began to vibrate. A text from his CFO. "Thorne just walked. Press is calling. What happened?" He stared at the phone. He stared at the $100 bill. And then he looked at Clara. All his rage, his humiliation, his catastrophic financial loss coalesced into one single point of burning hatred. "You," he whispered, his voice shaking. You ruined me." Pierre Dubois, finally snapping back to reality, rushed forward. His face was a mask of professional fury. He grabbed Clara by the arm. "You, out! Now! You are fired! You will be blacklisted! You will never work in this city again! Get out! Security!" Clara didn't resist. She didn't need to. She looked at Arthur Vance, the Titan, now a pale, trembling wreck, surrounded by the ruins of his grand ambition. She calmly untied the strings of her black apron. She folded it neatly and placed it on the service tray. She had lost her job. She had probably lost her apartment. She was, in all likelihood, facing a lawsuit that would bury her in debt for the rest of her life. And yet, she smiled. A small, sad, but utterly triumphant smile. "No, Mr. Vance," she said, her voice just for him. "I didn't ruin you. I just held up a mirror. You did all of this to yourself." She turned, ignoring Pierre's sputtering threats, and walked out of the alcove. She walked through the hushed, staring dining room, her back straight, her head held high. She pushed through the heavy oak doors of the Gilded Quill and stepped out into the damp, grey morning. A free woman. The moment Clara stepped onto the 64th Street sidewalk, the adrenaline that had sustained her evaporated, and her knees buckled. She leaned against the cold, rain-dampened limestone of the building, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The sounds of the city, a distant siren, the hiss of tires on wet pavement, rushed back in. "Oh my God," she whispered, her hand to her chest. "I did that. I actually did that." She had just detonated her life. The Gilded Quill wasn't just a job. It was the only thing keeping her and her mother afloat. Pierre wasn't exaggerating. A bad reference from a place like this, especially after a public scene with a man like Arthur Vance, was a death sentence in the hospitality industry. She was radioactive. The fear, cold and sharp, cut through the triumph. What had she done? How would she pay the rent, due in a week? How would she afford her mother's medication? Her phone, a simple, nondescript model, buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, her hand shaking so badly she almost dropped it. The screen was cracked. The caller ID read, "Mom." She pressed the accept button, trying to steady her voice. "Hey, Mom, I was just thinking about you. Clara, honey, are you okay? You sound strange." Her mother's voice, warm but perpetually worried, came through the line. Clara slid down the wall until she was sitting on the wet pavement, not caring about the people stepping around her. Tears, hot and sudden, welled in her eyes. "Mum, I think I just did something, either very brave or very, very stupid. What happened? Are you hurt?" "No, I'm fired," Clara said, and the word unleashed a sob she hadn't realized was building. "I lost the job, Mum." "Oh, honey, what? Why? Did you drop something? Was it that awful manager, Pierre?" "It was... Mum, do you remember Arthur Vance?" Silence on the other end of the line. Clara's mother hadn't spoken that name in almost a decade. It was a word that held the same power as cancer or death in their small, two-person family. "Clara," her mother said, her voice now dangerously quiet. "What about him?" "He was at my table, Mum. He was there, at my table, trying to close some giant deal. He was arrogant. He was yelling at me. He was the same man. He hadn't changed at all, and I couldn't." Clara explained everything. The confrontation, the deal, the name Sullivan Hayes, the look on Vance's face, the $200 million deal collapsing. When she finished, there was another long silence. "Mum, are you mad?" A sound came through the phone, a sound Clara hadn't heard in 10 years. Her mother was laughing. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was a deep, cathartic, soul-freeing laugh that was laced with tears. "Mad?" her mother finally said, her voice thick with emotion. "Oh, Clara, my brave, brilliant girl. Mad? I've never been more proud of you in my entire life. Your father, oh honey, your father would be, He would be so proud. But the rent. We'll figure it out, her mother said, a new strength in her voice. We always do. We're Sullivans. We're Hayes. We survive. You did what your father was never able to do. You confronted the monster. You took your name back. That's worth more than any job. Clara wept, right there on the sidewalk, a wave of relief washing over her. She wasn't alone. Meanwhile, inside the Gilded Quill, Arthur Vance was experiencing a very different kind of fallout. His phone was no longer vibrating. It was ringing. It was his chairman of the board, Harrison Kane. Arthur let it go to voicemail. He was staring at the empty chairs, the half-full water glasses. The quiet of the room was deafening. This is slander. We don't serve men like you here. You're a predator, Arthur. The words echoed. He, a master of optics, had been undone by them. He had spent 20 years building an image of an untouchable titan. That image had been shattered in 3 minutes by a 24-year-old in an apron. The Wall Street Journal reporter who lunched at the Gilded Quill every Tuesday was 3 tables over. He had seen it all. By 9:30 a.m., Ethelred Innovations stock, AETH, had frozen, triggered by a sudden, massive sell-off. By 10 a.m., the first headline hit the wires. Ethelred Novatech, $200 million merger collapses. CEO Vance in public dispute. Arthur Vance finally stood up. He fumbled with his wallet, his hands shaking. He threw 3 $100 bills on the table, a pathetic counter-gesture to Thorne's one. He walked out of the restaurant. The rain had stopped, but the world looked grey and hostile. As he stepped onto the sidewalk, a news van, alerted by the reporter inside, screeched to a halt. A journalist jumped out, microphone in hand. Mr. Vance! Mr. Vance! Is it true the Novatech deal is dead? Is it true you were thrown out of the restaurant? What are the allegations regarding Sullivan components? Arthur shoved the microphone away, his face a mask of primal fury. No comment! He stormed down the street, a man with nowhere to go. His car was dead. His deal was dead. And, as his phone lit up with a notification from the SEC's Enforcement Division, he had a horrifying feeling that his career was too. For 3 days, Clara Sullivan existed in a state of suspended animation. She and her mother pooled their money. They had enough for rent, but just barely. Clara spent her time applying for jobs, at diners, at chain restaurants, anywhere that wouldn't know the name the Gilded Quill. The triumph of that morning had faded, replaced by the dull, grinding anxiety of an uncertain future. She was making instant noodles in her tiny studio apartment when an email popped up on her aging laptop. The sender's address was opaque, a string of letters and numbers from a secure server. The subject line was one word: Sullivan. Her hand trembled as she clicked it. Dear Ms. Sullivan, I hope this message finds you. My name is Evelyn Reed. I am the Chief Legal Counsel for Novatech Solutions, under Mr. Marcus Thorne. We were present at the Gilded Quill on Tuesday morning. Mr. Thorne was impressed by your courage. He was also deeply intrigued by your claims. We have spent the last 72 hours cross-referencing market data from the period of Sullivan Components' dissolution. Your story, it seems, is not only plausible, but highly probable. Mr. Thorne believes in vindication. He also believes in talent. He would like to meet with you. Not for a job, he was clear to specify, but for a discussion. If you are willing, a car will be sent to your address tomorrow at 10:00 a.m. Your discretion is, of course, paramount. Sincerely, Evelyn Reed. Clara stared at the screen. A car, a meeting, Mr. Thorne. This was not a lawsuit. This was an invitation. The next morning, at 9:59 a.m., a black Mercedes S-Class, The kind that usually whispered past her on the street, pulled up to her apartment building. The driver, a professional woman in a dark suit, opened the door for her. Clara, wearing her one good blazer, purchased from a thrift store for $10, got in. She was driven to the Novatech Tower, a sleek, modern building of glass and steel. She was escorted to the top floor, to an office that was less a room and more a stratosphere. Marcus Thorne was standing by the floor-to-ceiling window, looking down at the city. "Ms. Sullivan," he said, turning. His face was severe, but his eyes held a spark of curiosity. "Thank you for coming. Please, sit. Coffee?" "No, thank you, sir," Clara said, her voice small. "I'm a little over coffee." A rare, thin smile touched Thorne's lips. "I imagine you are. Let's get to it. What you did was impulsive, reckless, and financially catastrophic for Arthur Vance. I admire it immensely." "Sir, I saw him and I—" "You did what you felt was right," Thorne interrupted, sitting opposite her. "I am not a sentimental man, Miss Sullivan. I am a pragmatic one. Your performance cost Arthur Vance 200 million tlayos, but it also cost me $200 million I was prepared to sell. Now, I am not. This leaves me with a problem. Vance was right about one thing. Novatech is stalled. We are missing a piece, a key, and I believe your father invented it." He leaned forward. "You said Vance buried the tech. Why? What was it?" This was it. Clara took a deep breath. "My father. He wasn't just a businessman. He kept journals. After he died, I saved them. All of them. They're not just engineering notes. They're his life." "Where are these journals?" Thorne asked, his voice sharp. "In a storage unit in Queens," Clara said. "I've paid the bill on it for 10 years. It's the only other thing I've ever spent money on." "What's in them?" "His final design," Clara said, her voice gaining strength. "He called it the Atlas capacitor. It was different. It didn't just store energy, it recycled it. It had a 0-point energy return. It could, he claimed, reduce battery waste by 90% and increase energy efficiency by 500%. It was perfect. And Ethelred, with their massive, profitable and inefficient battery and capacitor lines, couldn't have that. Vance didn't want to adopt it. He wanted to kill it, to protect his monopoly." Thorne was silent. He processed this. 500%. That's not just innovative. That's world-changing. It's why Vance buried it. It's why he destroyed my father. And I think it's why he wanted to buy you, Mr. Thorne. Your own research. It must have been getting close. Too close." Thorne nodded slowly. "We were. We kept hitting a wall on thermal regulation. We couldn't stop our prototypes from melting." "My father solved that," Clara whispered. "He used a synthetic diamond substrate. It's all in the journals." Marcus Thorne stood up and walked back to the window. His mind was racing. This was a pivot, not just for his company, but for the entire industry. "Ms. Sullivan, Clara," he said, turning back. "Arthur Vance stole your past. I'd like to offer you a chance to buy back your future." "What? What do you mean?" "I am not offering you a job as a waitress. That would be an insult. I am offering you a position at Novatech, a high-level executive consultancy. I want you to bring me those journals. I want you to work with my R&D team as the head of this project to resurrect your father's work, to build the Atlas capacitor." He paused, a predatory gleam in his eye. "We will build it. We will patent it. And we will use it to dismantle Arthur Vance's empire, piece by piece." He extended a hand. "I will pay you a salary that will clear your debts in 3 months. I will give you a 5% stake in the Atlas project, and I will give you a budget. Your new title is Director of Legacy Innovation. Do we have a deal, Ms. Sullivan?" Clara looked at his outstretched hand. This was it, the culmination of a decade of pain. It wasn't just revenge. It was justice. It was a restoration. She stood up and took his hand. Her grip was firm. "We have a deal, Mr. Thorne. Let's go get my father's journals." The next 6 months were a blur of frenetic, focused energy. Clara Sullivan Hayes, she used her full name now, was no longer serving coffee. She was living in the Novatech R&D labs, a high-security skunk works facility, 20 floors below Marcus Thorne's office. Her father's journals, filled with his elegant, precise handwriting and complex equations, were treated like sacred texts. The Novatech engineers, at first skeptical of this 24-year-old with no formal degree, were quickly humbled. She didn't just have the journals. She understood them. She had grown up with these theories. She spoke her father's language. She pointed them to the synthetic diamond substrate. She explained his breakthroughs in thermal dynamics. Where the Novatech team had been using brute force, Thomas Sullivan Hayes had used elegance. While Clara worked, the world was dismantling Arthur Vance. The SEC investigation, spurred by the public allegations and Thorne's subsequent anonymous tip, was merciless. They subpoenaed the records of the Sullivan Components acquisition. They found the payments to Michael Reed, the saboteur. They found emails from Vance to his board outlining a clear strategy of patent suppression and market monopolization. The Wall Street Journal ran a front-page exposé titled, "The Titan's Toxic Legacy: How Ethelred Buried the Future." Ethelred's stock, AETH, didn't just fall, it ceased to exist. The board, in a panic, fired Arthur Vance. They tried to rebrand, to distance themselves, but the damage was done. Vance, facing multiple federal indictments for fraud, conspiracy, and antitrust violations, was a pariah. He was forced to sell his penthouse to pay his legal bills. The 1968 Jaguar E-Type was seized by creditors. Exactly 8 months after the confrontation at the Gilded Quill, Novatech Solutions held a press conference. Marcus Thorne stood at the podium, but he yielded the floor. "I'd like to introduce the director of our Legacy Innovation Project, and the true mind behind this breakthrough, Ms. Clara Sullivan Hayes." Clara, now in a sharp, dark blue power suit, her hair cut in a professional, confident style, stepped up to the microphone. She was terrified, but she looked at her mother in the front row, and her nerve solidified. "For 10 years, she began, the world has been running on inefficient, wasteful technology. We've been told it's the best we can do. This was a lie." She held up a small, gleaming object, no bigger than a fingernail. "This is the Atlas Sullivan capacitor. Based on the lost work of my father, Thomas Sullivan Hayes, it is not an improvement on existing tech. It is a replacement. It will double the battery life of every phone, every laptop, and every electric car. It will make renewable energy storage viable on a mass scale. It is the future." The announcement sent a shock wave through the global market. Novatech's stock value quadrupled in a single day. Orders poured in from every major manufacturer. Clara Sullivan Hayes, the ex-waitress, was now one of the most powerful and respected women in technology. The day after the launch, Clara visited 2 places. First, she visited the Gilded Quill. She walked in, not in an apron, but in a designer suit. Pierre Dubois, the maitre d', saw her. His face went white. Miss Sullivan Hayes," he stammered. A table." "No, thank you, Pierre," Clara said, smiling kindly. She handed him an envelope. "This is for Maria and the other staff. A tip for their excellent service." Inside was a check for $50,000. "And for you, I just wanted to thank you. Firing me was the best thing that ever happened to me. She left him sputtering in the lobby. Her second stop was a quiet, green cemetery in Queens. She walked to a simple headstone. Thomas Sullivan Hayes, a gentle mind, a beloved father. She sat on the grass, the afternoon sun warming her face. She pulled something from her pocket. It was the first production model of the Atlas capacitor. She placed it on the headstone, on top of the engraved name. "We did it, Dad," she whispered, tracing the letters. I told them all. They remember your name now." She didn't cry. She just sat for a long time, the silence of the past finally at peace with the roar of the future. The $200 million deal that fell apart hadn't been an end. It was a beginning. It wasn't just a story of a CEO's downfall. It was the story of a daughter's victory, a testament that justice, no matter how long it's buried, will always, eventually, find its way to the light. In the end, it wasn't just about 200 million, it was about a name. Arthur Vance lost his empire because he believed he was powerful enough to erase a man's legacy. Clara Sullivan won because she was brave enough to defend it. She didn't just get revenge, she reclaimed her father's stolen future, and, in doing so, changed the world. The greatest deal that day wasn't the one that fell apart. It was the one made between a daughter's memory and a future waiting to be born. What do you think? Was Clara's public confrontation an act of impulsive recklessness or a calculated move of karmic genius? What would you have done if you were in her shoes? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you love stories where karma delivers the final bill, make sure to like this video, share it with a friend, and subscribe for more true life drama every week.